Now, all participants are going to be muted until the audience participation portion begins. And at that point, I'm going to invite you to raise your virtual hand by clicking on the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. You're going to be invited to unmute and ask your question. You'll also see a link in the chat inviting you to visit the Plan2040 website. We really encourage you to do so. The plan is your plan, and we want to hear from you by November 15th. So with all of that behind us, I wanted to hand it over to our beginning speaker tonight, County Executive Steuart Pittman, to tell us about our smart future. County Executive, take it away. You are on mute, County Executive.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Matt. So this is the second of 3 virtual town halls that we're doing during the public comment period for Plan 2040, our county general development plan. And the topic is smart future, which could mean just about anything. It doesn't really explain in the title. The first one was green future. So let me tell you what I see this topic as tonight. And I'm going to come at this with a slightly different, a very different perspective than I have in land use conversations up until now. I will acknowledge that I have a reputation as being anti-development, that I've been responsible for putting in a lot of protections to our natural environment and limiting growth and development in areas where there's open space, green space near the water, insisting that we follow county code, stop giving out modifications to get around the code to allow development to happen, requiring that we have adequate public facilities before we do development, everything from schools to roads to public safety, and as well as parks. And so that's been a bit of caused a lot of discomfort in the development community. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the kind of development that we want. and my belief is that within a couple of years, people who build stuff for a living, plan it and build it, will actually feel pretty good about Anne Arundel County, because there will be a plan that makes clear what kind of development we want and what we don't want, what's allowed and what's not allowed, and we'll be applying the laws consistently. So to get to that point, and that's what a business needs. You need certainty. You need to know when you make a business plan that you're going to be able to move forward. You shouldn't have to guess at whether or not you're going to get a modification to get around the rule. And you certainly shouldn't have to give a campaign contribution to somebody to help you get that project through the pipeline. So we got to get away from that stuff in Anne Arundel County. And that's what our goal was in our Plan 2040. And I know that a lot of residents in this county feel like these general development plans and then the small area planning, regional planning we'll do in the future have been put on the shelf and not implemented. And there was no way that on my watch we were going to do any kind of a plan that didn't have teeth in it, that didn't have an implementation plan attached to it. So you're going to hear more about that from our speakers tonight. But when I think about the kind of growth, the kind of development that we do want in Anne Arundel County, I'm really thinking about areas where we have vacant buildings, where we have paved parking lots, areas where we have transportation networks, multimodal transportation facilities, train stations, access to roads, adequate roads, and school capacity, all of those things. And so if we're going to say that those are the areas where we want to do development, that's not the end of the story. You don't just say to the developers, okay, you can build here and you can't build there. What we need to be able to do is to help guide those developers so that they're building what the community wants. So one of the things that was very exciting to me recently was that the county council passed a thing called the Glen Burnie overlay bill that allowed for redevelopment in Glen Burnie, where the community wanted some redevelopment, and Councilwoman Pickard, who represents that area, wanted to make sure there was good redevelopment. they changed the rules for development for that area. And I see it as a pilot that could be used in other areas to do smart growth. And the first part of that was that the community gets to meet and have a say in the process before the process even begins, at the very beginning, so that the developer knows and government knows what people want. The regional plans that are going to come after our general development plan in 9 regions of the county are going to be the beginning of that process, where residents of that community come together like they did in the small area planning back 20 years ago, and lay out what they want their communities, their built environment to look like. So that does include roads and transportation infrastructure. It also includes public facilities, and it includes the kinds of businesses and the kinds of buildings that people support. I hope that means housing at all price points. We have developers generally build to make a profit, and they'd be unwise not to. So they speculate on land and they build what's most profitable. It's been a lot of luxury housing, and it's been a lot of suburban sprawl. And that's been part of the frustration that people have had. We want to provide the incentives so that they build housing for the people who actually work in our county at every wage level, and housing in places that make living where you don't have to drive all the time possible. So a lot of young people, I'm thrilled that a lot of millennials say that they would like to be able to work and live where they don't have to have a car, and they can also go out and be entertained and shop in the same community. And so these walkable communities, walkable town centers, we've made little efforts at doing that in the county, but we haven't done it well. So those are our goals, to do it well. So we have to, when development happens, we have to improve the quality of people's lives. And so for the developers out there, you are our partners. We can't do this without you. Government's not going to build this stuff. You're going to build this stuff. And yeah, it has to be profitable, but it also has to be community supported. So that's what this plan is all about. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And that's why I don't think that our county is anti-development. Our county is for smart growth. And if we pass this plan through the council, we're going to get comments from everybody at the end of this comment period. It will then go to the Planning Advisory Board and then the council. And if it passes close to what it looks like now, with the recommendations for legislative changes and for implementation that it has in there now, I believe we're going to get where we want to go. So back to you, Matt.
Thank you, sir. And it's exciting to hear how much this plan has to offer for the future of Anne Arundel County. Smart buildings in the right place, not in the wrong place, for all the people of Anne Arundel County. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of my colleagues who will really help us modernize our code to make that ambitious plan reality. And that is our Planning and Zoning Officer, Mr. Stephen Kai-Ziegler. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here tonight. Again, Steve Kai-Ziegler, Planning and Zoning Officer. I think I want to follow up on several of the points that the county executive made. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to concentrate on a certain policy recommendations that are coming out of 2040 that deal with the built environment. And I want to just share some of those policy recommendations and how we apply those through a variety of implementation modes. So the first is, we know we need to reform the zoning code, which is Article 18, and the development regulations, which is Article 17. That is a given. There needs to be significant changes to those codes to better implement Plan 2040. We'll do that through revisions that ensure that the county code supports the vision, goals, and policies of Plan 2040, and that it works effectively as a regulatory tool by adding purpose and definition statements for each of the zoning districts, removing contradictory language so that the code is internally consistent in its definitions and requirements. Lori Rhodes can probably talk a little bit later about the difficulties we've had over the last 15 years marrying those two things up. We're going to be including language in Articles 17 and 18 that text amendments to these codes shall be found by the Planning and Zoning Officer to be consistent with the new GDP. And we'll explore different tools to promote redevelopment in designated revitalization areas. like the county executive talked about with the recent Glen Burnie legislation. We're also going to ensure that consistent implementation of the county code, meaning which deals with the built environment, will include efforts currently underway, such as green and blue notices, to ensure that everyone knows how we're interpreting the code. It provides a great deal more transparency than we've ever done in the past, in the sense that when we made policy decisions on how we would implement something, typically it went to a few developers. Now we post it on our websites for everyone to see. We will also transition to digital plan review to make the process more efficient and, again, more transparent, so that everyone can monitor, watch how we do development review in the county moving forward. We're going to clarify requirements around modifications so that they are used more appropriately. And we're going to reduce the types of modifications that are allowed. Last, we're going to develop and strengthen planning and protection measures for historic and archaeological resources and incorporate historic preservation more effectively into the planning and policy decision-making process by developing and adopting a cultural and historic preservation master plan for the county, by updating existing cultural resource code provisions to strengthen protective measures and to reflect best preservation practices, and last, to continue to maintain and update the county's inventory of significant historical resources, as well as the database of those historic cemeteries. So those are just a few things that I'm mentioning that come directly out of Plan 2040 that I think show how we're going to implement future goals, policy objectives for the built environment. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Plenty on Steve's plate, as you can see. We've given him and his whole staff quite a bit of work moving forward to make this all happen, and we couldn't be more excited to get started. So you've already heard a lot tonight about building in the right place, and the county executive even talked about building around transit centers. Well, whenever it comes to transportation and transit, we've got to turn to Mr. Ramond Robinson, our director of our Office of Transportation and our transportation guru here in Anne Arundel County, who will tell you all about another one of our master plans that fits very well with Plan 2040, and that is Move Anne Arundel. And I'm sure he'll go into even more than Move Anne Arundel. So Mr. Transportation Guru, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. When you say guru, that makes it sound like I have all the answers. Like, I don't have all the answers. I just know where to go to get those answers. One of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about in regards to Move Anne Arundel is, you know, the county executive often the slogan with Anne Arundel County being the best place for all. So the vision statement of Move Anne Arundel is essentially to provide safe, efficient, equitable, and sustainable multimodal mobility that provides residents, travelers, and visitors with connectivity and choice. All right, so that's a vision statement that is very much complementary to establishing networks that are associated with the best place for all. So when you talk about Move Anne Arundel and how it connects with the GDP, I like what the county executive said in regards to how we're going to address these things, because essentially what we're trying to do is we're figuring out how to relieve traffic congestion. We're overcoming inaccessibility by having multi-mobility associated with the way that we are moving in the county. And then by doing this, we are, you know, restoring quality of life for folks, and we're establishing, you know, what better neighborhoods and what downtown vitality actually looks like. So infrastructure and mobility are actually paced with land use. And the goal of Move Anne Arundel is to establish that role of transportation in the county. Move Anne Arundel does just that. It integrates and prioritizes recommendations based on 5 modal principles that we use as the basis for inserting into the general development plan and helping us to establish how we're going to be able to handle transportation connectivity issues currently and how it's going to look further out. So we have priority investment areas that are kind of placed into 5 different categories in Move Anne Arundel. Those priority investment areas are upgrading the county's corridors and strengthening community cores. Essentially what that looks at is how are we looking at areas such as Watt Chapel, Maryland 648, B of A Boulevard, Maryland 170, access to parole or in parole, access to the city of Annapolis, access to Annapolis Net. We're also looking at improving regional corridors and making commutes more reliable. When you talk about regional corridors, the ones that come to the top of the list for everybody in Anne Arundel County is Maryland 2 and Maryland 3. which we're making some extensive strides on and working with the state along with the county executive in trying to make sure that we're getting these improvements associated there. Talking about walking, we definitely want to make communities more walkable. Every trip, I don't care if you're walking from your house to your car, ends and begins with walking. So if we have an improved pedestrian network, that again leads us to being more mobility management friendly in the county. We want to build a connected bicycle network. Bicycling is not just for the recreational user. That is a mode. That is how people are able to actually get from point A to point B. And then we also want to look at new transit models. Examples that we have, like we've done in South County, where the traditional approach to how you provide transit didn't suit for how we could best provide it in Anne Arundel County. But we looked at a non-traditional approach and it actually worked to our benefit. And we're actually seeing some success there. And so that's something that can actually work throughout the county as we move forward. So in looking at all of those things, Anne Arundel County, Move Anne Arundel had 4 distinct goals that we focused on. We wanted a safe transportation system, and what a safe transportation system can hinge on is taking into account using Vision Zero strategies. Vision Zero is a strategy that helps us to eliminate traffic fatalities, severe injuries, while we're increasing safety, health, and equitable mobility for all users. They have 4 strategies that are interchangeable as it relates to Vision Zero. How do we engineer better so that we're designing things like the built environment so that it supports multi-mobility? How are we educating people? How are we enforcing it? And then how are we utilizing emergency management in order to make these things significant as we develop a safe transportation system? Integrated transportation and land use planning, along with development reviews that help us to look at pedestrian safety and multimodal access by reducing traffic speeds and maximizing vehicle access points. That's significant when we start to talk about what is a safe transportation system. Another goal is a multimodal transportation system that provides practical and reliable transportation choices and connections for all users. Think back to the vision. How are we providing mobility choices throughout the county? How do we increase mode share? It's not just about how do we move cars, but how do we move people by splitting up what type of modes they're able to use, and is that mode available to be used based on the built environment that we have or the services that we're putting in place? How do we maintain a safe environment or safe infrastructure as it relates to pedestrian and bicycles for short distance trips, more practical users? And then certainly the county is looking for opportunities to move the needle by having these transportation alternatives in the mix, right? So, multimodal in its face, it's multimodal. It's truly looking at all of these variations. The third goal that we had was a transportation system that is resilient and protects the environment. For all the things that we do as it relates to transportation, when we reduce vehicle miles traveled and we're traversing or providing different avenues for people to travel in different ways, they have significant impacts on how we are changing our ambient air quality, not just in Anne Arundel County, but in the region as a whole. How are we utilizing our assets that we have when we talk about our vehicles that we're using, or even the way that we are actually building certain things and how it's related to climate change. And the fourth and last goal is a transportation system that is in good condition. Essentially what that does for us is that looks at, how do we manage our assets and provide a solid foundation that we are monitoring to make sure that we can optimize the preservation and we can upgrade and replace different assets from a cost-effective and programming measures within the county. So with all of those things, that's what kind of makes up Move Anne Arundel for us. And it's significant because it does bode to how land use and transportation are going to transition to kind of help the county move forward. I'll stop there because I could keep going and going and going, but I think with that, I think we kind of get the picture as to what Move Anne Arundel does.
Thanks, Ramond. That's great. As you can tell, we could all talk for a long time. There are so many goals and policies in this document, and we've struggled to just pick the top ones that we wanted to talk about tonight, but we could talk all night if you let us. So now I'm going to hand it over to Chris Phipps, the director of our Department of Public Works. And before I do, I want to say a little bit about Chris and the department. This department is the one who will take all of this, these requirements for new infrastructure, for revitalizing our old infrastructure and make it happen. Whether it's your trails, your roads, your stormwater, your wastewater, Chris Phipps and his Department of Public Works is where it happens. So Chris, tell us about all the pipes, all the roads, and how you're gonna make this work.
All right, I'll do my best in lightning round here, Matt. And I think I'm gonna I appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing in Public Works. And I'm gonna take a little different approach explaining some of the specific kind of things that we're doing to support the redevelopment principles using adaptive technologies that are already underway and proven to work. So our vision in Public Works for Plan 2040 is to integrate smart technologies in all areas of infrastructure to ensure full utilization and optimization of capacity that's already available and target expansion strategically to minimize need for oversizing our assets. This approach recognizes that the county has matured to a level of near saturation as it relates to infrastructure, is now more effective to gain capacity expansion through smarter and more efficient use of the infrastructure already built, investments already made. The county's infrastructure future will be more driven by technology investments to make better and more insightful consideration of the capacity available and less on the expansion of physical brick and mortar, aligning more closely to smart growth concepts than green space development. And so in our transportation sector, we will be developing partnerships with SHA to increase mobility with targeted lane expansions along strategic segments of Maryland Route 2 and Maryland Route 3 corridors, utilizing recently available funding through the permanent improvement bond funds. We'll be increasing efficiency of traffic flow along busy corridors, utilizing adaptive control technologies that, systems that allows traffic signals through genetic algorithms to adjust dynamically based on current measured vehicle volumes. This technology has already been deployed along the Forest Drive and Riva Road corridors and has demonstrated an estimated 8 to 12% reduction in travel time versus not having the technology. Expanding regional hiker-biker trail networks to provide full continuity and functional use to encourage motorists to select pedestrian and bike modes of transportation over vehicles, lowering the number of cars on the road. Projects are underway to complete the Broadneck Trail, connecting the BNA Trail to Sandy Point Park, and to complete the bridge over the Patuxent River. This final connection of the WBNA Trail to Prince George's County links with the East Coast Greenway extending over 3,000 miles from Maine to Florida, and utilizing latest best practices available to evaluate highway capacity and adequate public facilities for transportation. Modern methods now incorporate transit, pedestrian, and bicycle mobility factors, providing a complete assessment of all transportation modes to allow more informed decisions regarding impacts and required improvements in response to new development. We've got a work group already underway exploring these concepts. And in our water and wastewater sector, we're transitioning to smart water meter technology to provide real-time and real location information regarding water usage and presence of water leaks. This Sentinel technology will provide instant information regarding water leaks that would allow for immediate notification to customers so leaks can be quickly identified and addressed. Current conventional meter reading is done quarterly, leading to more than 3 months before such leaks are known, leading to high bills and wasted resources. Expanding water reuse and water conservation to increase replenishment of our aquifers and ensure a reliable supply of water for generations to come. Using smart sewer technology by installing level sensors in strategic and critical sewer manholes to provide an early warning of potential sewer overflows due to downstream blockages. Advanced knowledge of rising levels in manholes would allow for rapid response to clear blockages and avoid sewer overflows, thus protecting human and environmental health. And finally, in our stormwater sector, we're already using continuous monitoring and adaptive control systems at existing stormwater ponds to optimize storage capacity and flood control in response to varying storm intensities. Dynamic water level control by use of motorized weirs would store more water during dry periods and allow controlled releases during wetter periods. This technology is integrated into weather sensing programs to allow for predictive response ahead of advancing storms. So these initiatives are all but a sample of the smarter technologies and initiatives we are pursuing in Public Works to locate new infrastructure where it's needed, optimize the capacity of the infrastructure we already have, and to develop sustainable solutions to allow new growth and development without depleting our limited resources. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think we're all learning things here tonight. And after this meeting, I'm going to be calling Chris for a whole slide deck. I want to learn all about these adaptive technologies for these stormwater ponds. It sounds really cool, Chris. So I'm going to hand it over to my final colleague for this evening, and that is the esteemed Lori Rhodes, our Deputy Chief Accountability Officer and our Land Use Officer here in Anne Arundel County. She works within the administration and gets all of us on the phone here together to make this plan happen. So Lori, tell us about your role and tell us about how you're going to put us to work.
Well, let me tell you about my role as the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer. And let me kind of touch on some of the things that the county executive has talked about, as well as Steve Ziegler, about why we have to work so hard to move in a smarter direction for a smarter future for our county residents. What did not happen in the last administration and administrations before that is respecting and implementing the plan. I mean, I worked in planning and zoning for many, many years, and I cannot tell you the number of times that I picked the plan up and even looked at it. So I'm very excited that the county executive has the political will to implement this plan, to really make Anne Arundel County the best place for all, which is really what is exciting me. I'm going to be working with all of the land use officers to make sure that we draft the necessary legislation and policies that are needed to implement this plan, because without implementation, this plan is just words in a book that'll sit on the shelf like it did in prior administrations. So I'm looking forward to working with Steve to update Articles 17 and 18. We already have a legislative team put together. We're already looking at the built environment. We have some draft bills that we're ready to move forward on. And what I'm very excited about is that this plan has very specific language about how we're going to implement our strategies. That's very important, because when we go before the county council, who ultimately has to pass this legislation, once they pass this plan, they're pretty much they're gonna be on the hook to support this legislation, because all of the language that's in this plan will be woven into the bills that we're going to present to make these communities healthier, to make transportation modes better, to do all the initiatives that Chris Phipps wants to do in public works. But the land use regulations, development, and zoning definitely have to be reworked. I'm very excited about working on this initiative because there's a lot of good things that we can do. I'm also very, very happy that for the first time, we're going to have an implementation action committee. So we're actually going to go out and we're going to get diversity on this committee to help us with these region plans and the legislation that needs to follow. They're going to be monitoring what we do. That's never happened before. So we're going to have people monitoring us. We're going to be holding ourselves accountable so we can actually say we are going to respect this plan, because we're going to be on the hook too. The plan calls for us to do that. So I'm very, very excited to be with this team and working for County Executive Pittman.
Thank you so much, Lori. And I don't want to make light of anything that we've heard tonight, but I think that Lori just capped it off with an exclamation mark, and that is those implementation committees and holding your county executive, the administration, and your county council accountable in future years. You're holding us accountable tonight, and you're going to be able to hold us accountable in future years, and that's new. So,
right, and what I just wanted to say, County Executive Pittman does have the political will that was lacking before, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So to begin holding us accountable or asking questions about these dynamic stormwater technologies or whatever else is on your mind, I wanted to invite you now as an audience to press your raise hand button. and I will invite you to be unmuted if you raise your hands, and I'll go one at a time here. So Jasmine Wilding, you're on the air.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thanks, Jasmine.
Okay. Well, first of all, the county engineers is having a whole conference on smart stormwater stuff. If you're interested in November, I can send you that information. But my question is actually for Mr. Kai Ziegler. As the zoning code regulations are going to outlast the current administration, my question is, what are you envisioning specifically in the zoning code to encourage redevelopment? So I think what comes to my mind is the town center overlays and this new concept of the Glen Burnie, which I don't know much about. So if you could send out the information on that and when that goes effective, that would be helpful. But I think the plan is good, but it's a little bit hard from the public standpoint to kind of digest all of the different policies and kind of end up with an actual vision of, we share the same vision, but it's hard to understand from all the laws and everything in the plan of how we actually get to the vision. So I think the zoning code is sort of where it kind of comes together and makes sense. I was just wondering if you had any preliminary ideas of how you're going to make the redevelopment incentive a reality.
Good evening. Again, great question, Steve Kai Ziegler, Planning and Zoning Officer. I'm going to say, I think you answered to a degree your own question. It has to come from code. And the Plan 2040 by itself provides for policy guidance, but the only way it gets implemented is by creating laws or changing laws or zoning land. There's a whole bunch more than that, but in the context of your question, I think that's where we're at. What is going to happen, and we have been working on, is a major update overhaul of the Pearl Town Center regulations. In addition, current law requires that Odenton Town Center regulations, the plan, be updated every 5 years. We're working on that. If you go online, Office of Planning and Zoning or County Council, you can find the bill. I forget the number off the top of my head that deals with Glen Burnie, the overlay. But that is a pilot project, and we've just had it adopted. We have not had a project come in under it. We're very hopeful that it will, I'm going to say, help move projects in that area forward that have more flexibility than they were previously allowed to do. Assuming that that will be successful, we intend to tailor versions of that as needed to other parts of the county through overlays or other zoning techniques. So I think that the best way to answer your question is we have to do it by either creating new laws that relate to land use or changing the ones that are currently on the books. And we have every intention of doing that. That's part of the implementation that Lori is talking about.
Great, thank you, Steve. And I'm gonna ask Kaya Smith now. Or County Executive, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I just wanted to point out that when you go to the Plan 2040, the smaller of the two books, not the background big one, the whole second half of it is very specific recommendations for either legislative changes or changes in design manuals or policy. And it's organized by category. And it's a really fascinating read because each one has the responsible department, the time frame, the performance measures for it. And so if you got the time and the interest, that's really getting into the weeds, but it really gets into to how this is actually going to be implemented.
Great point. And there are a lot in there. I think on our last one, you said there were 93 specifically on the environment. Just on the environment, yeah. 93 people assigned to work. Well, sometimes the same people, but assigned to work on it. All right, Ms. Kaya Smith. I hope I said that correctly.
It is Kaya, but
Sorry about
no offense. I have, I guess, two questions, and forgive me if I don't know how to or whom I should directly put this to. One is based off of the changes that are coming about. how do you propose that you will be including the public in these changes? While we're here in a Zoom chat, I feel like there may not be ways where we can specify or the word gets out there well enough that says, hey, these are the changes that are coming in. Is this really what the community wants? And that's my first question. And then my second question is, as I see that we're having all of these new developments, which is great. However, we still have homes that are in older developments or single family homes that are, not within a specific development, but that'll still be around. And therefore, I have concerns about how population is increasing and making it so that we already have overcrowded schools. And moving forward, it doesn't seem that schools are being built fast enough as the development is happening. What are your plans on how that is going, your development? Are you going to slow it up? Are you going to make sure that schools are built at the same time that new developments are occurring? What are your, I guess, future plans for that as well?
Thank you, Kaya. I'm going to let Steuart Pittman take that first, and then I'm going to kick it over to Steve Ziegler, and then also Chris Phipps will take it third because Chris is working on APF. I'm sorry, no, Steve Ziegler is working on APF. We've got so much going on. Okay, so County Executive, you take it first, and then Steve Ziegler.
Yeah, good question. I think, first of all, I don't believe that just because there's development pressure that development has to happen. So when we say we don't have adequate public facilities and it's impossible to get a project permitted, that means the projects don't get built. One of the things that we're doing 2 studies coming up. One is assessing our impact fees, which are likely to go up because they were set much lower for development on transportation in particular than was recommended when they were set. So those are likely to go up, but also the fiscal impacts of development. And we know that there are people who have always said that development pays because you get tax revenue off it, but we know that some development actually costs us more in infrastructure than we get in taxes. So we have to look carefully at that. So no, we don't have to build just because there's pressure to build. However, when we look at particularly school capacity, there are 10,000 empty seats in our school district. The problem has been where those seats are don't necessarily line up with where smart growth would encourage development to happen. So, we may want to do transit-oriented development near a train station, but that might not have school capacity. So that's something the school board is going to have to look at, that yeah, we have a very aggressive and ambitious program to build new schools, but we also have a lot of empty seats.
Okay, Steve Ziegler again, and I'm gonna touch on the last part that the county executive. I think it is important to know, and I think most folks in Anne Arundel County, when they live in a school district where that individual school where your kids go to is over capacity, there is a tendency to look at that fact and assume it's countywide. And as the boss said, we have a very, very large number of vacant seats in a countywide school system. And the major reason that has happened is really the way that we have done school adequate public facilities and how the Board of Ed has struggled to redistrict their school districts according to where growth is actually happening or where students are actually happening or coming from. Just because you have new residential development doesn't mean that it's producing much, if any, new residential, or I'm going to say public school students. So I think it's some information that the county executive just shared that will, I think, be coming out more and more. I'm hearing the council members start to touch on it, and it's an important fact that we use to make more informed decisions as we move forward. As far as our growth rate, this may surprise you, but Anne Arundel County in the last 10 years is growing at a slower average annual growth rate than probably any time in our history. We're growing at less than 1% per year. It's a very, very small relative increase in the amount of new development that's happening. And I think the last thing that you touched on is how do citizens get involved with all these planning functions in the future in this age of Zoom meetings. And actually, I'm going to say our interaction with the public is fascinatingly successful, I think, in how we've incorporated technology into those meetings. We have a citizen advisory committee that has assisted in the development of the general development plan. Over the last 8-9 months, all of our meetings have been via Zoom. I have not had an in-person meeting with a developer, an aggrieved person in the county, anyone that was not on a Zoom meeting. So we've figured out how to do that. But what's also going to happen is we recognize the importance that our citizens get to play in how we plan for our future. As you get into Plan 2040, and you heard the county executive say, once this plan is adopted, we immediately start doing a series of region plans. There's 9 scheduled, and it's a more refined form of planning that will occur that each will end up with a component of comprehensive rezoning. Each one of those region plans will have a citizen advisory committee. So I would say your questions tonight, stay tuned. If you're interested in participating, let us know. We still need to develop an application process for people to apply. What we're really interested in having is a very transparent, a very diverse group of citizens assist us in these planning processes, and we intend to do that fully. Along with the planning process, we intend to use this same type of component, citizen advisory committees, to, I'm going to say, grade us in the report card and how well we're implementing. We need our citizens to assist us to make sure that we implement these plans that we hope are going to be adopted. I hope that answered the 3 questions you had. It was a long-winded one, but.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Go ahead, County Executive.
And I hate to do this because I know we have other people with questions, but I wanted to add one more thing about this whole pressure to develop and population issue, which is that we're part of a region, and we're part of the Washington region and also the Baltimore region. I sit on the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, which is the leaders of the counties as well as the mayor around Baltimore. And they do a lot of research on transportation and housing, and people in Baltimore, developers and elected officials and everybody, complain that they've lost a lot of their tax base. A lot of people have moved out of Baltimore City. A lot of businesses have moved out. A lot of vacant buildings, and they need to rebuild their tax base. And in the suburbs, we over the years have encouraged development, and we've said, coming out to the land of pleasant living, we'll have lower taxes. We have all kinds of assets, and then we didn't actually do the balance sheet very well. So we've created a lot of expenses for ourselves. We've created a lot of traffic, and we've created a lot of overcrowded schools. So the residents in the suburbs are now saying, well, why did we do that? So how do we get if we believe in smart growth, we believe in building where there's infrastructure, and cities have infrastructure. Baltimore City has old infrastructure, but it's got infrastructure and transportation. So if we all in the region believe that we want to encourage investment in Baltimore City, then we have to think about how to do that. And the best way to do that, I believe, is for the regional leaders to work together and have consistent land use regulations that do drive development back in to Baltimore City. Not that we don't want any development in the county, but if our region is going to thrive, Baltimore City has to thrive, and that means getting they're mostly regional developers, getting them to reinvest in Baltimore City and build the kind of housing there, as well as the commercial development there that city needs, and it'll take some pressure off of us.
Thank you, County Executive. And just one last thing I wanted to add, which is how citizens can participate. It's not just between now and November 15th, and it's not just on the implementation committees, which we really encourage your participation on, but it's also at every county council hearing. This plan sets up a legislative agenda that may last for years, and it sets out pieces of legislation that we will bring in front of the county council. And you can attend those hearings, and we encourage you to do so. So with that, I wanted to switch to a question that I see in the chat, and I would encourage others to raise their hand or write down questions as we go here. This is from Don Weller. How does the Plan 2040 vision for a limited access freeway in the Route 3 corridor relate to the ongoing upgrades of Route 3, such as lane widening and intersection improvements? And I first want to give the county executive a chance to talk about Route 3, and then I'm going to kick it off to Ramond Robinson to talk about transportation on Route 3. And I also want to hear from Chris Phipps about the adequate public facilities work group that we have looking into traffic concerns. So County Executive.
Okay, so Route 3 has been frustrating. It was originally built to be a throughway, a highway, and then for some reason it became a growth corridor, and a lot of commercial development happened there. And now we've even got a lot of residential development happening there as well. And it's unsafe. So on the one hand, you're trying to move cars through quickly, but on the other hand, they're coming in and out to get into all these new developments. So we have a traffic problem, and we have sprawl growth that was not well planned in my view. And so the state highways, it's a state road, obviously, had put together a plan years ago. It's never been funded to do improvements to deal with the failing intersections there. My own belief is that when there are failing intersections, there should not be development to add to the traffic on those failing intersections. I've gone to the Office of Law and said we ought to have a development moratorium until we fix it. They've said that probably wouldn't hold up in court, but there may be a way to do it if we really are moving forward on a plan to fix it. So in terms of the plan to fix it, Pete Ron was the transportation secretary, didn't seem to be making much progress there. There was not much progress in the past administration, but Secretary Slater, the new transportation secretary, seems to be much more understanding of the problems. And we finally, after many years, got a plan from SHA to do the work, to do some lane widenings and some of the technology stuff that Chris Phipps talked about as well. And Chris mentioned the permanent public improvements fund that we've created, and you all are paying for that. It was a 0.1% increase in your income tax, and it's going to create it's making it possible for us to do a lot of road infrastructure improvements. So we're dangling in front of SHA close to $20 million for Route 3 and saying, if you'll manage this project and work with us, you've got our 20 million, you put in some money and we'll move forward. We're very close to actually having an MOU to move forward on that project. So when we get to that point, I believe we shouldn't be doing any development until we get it fixed. That's going to be up to the Office of Law as to whether we can get away with that kind of a moratorium. But that's the first step, and that's how it relates to the development issue in my mind. I mean, Chris may be able to say more on adequate public facilities and what we can do to slow things down until things get fixed. But it's a major problem in the Route 2 corridor as well. And we believe that if we get traffic moving on the Route 2 and 3 corridors, fewer people are going to be using 97 that would otherwise be using those. Might free up some of the problems on 97. And I've been told in no uncertain terms that Yumi Hogan, the governor's wife, wants to fix the problems on 97. And so the transportation secretary is committed to it. And we're using that to get him to work on Route 2 and Route 3. So we're moving forward.
Thank you, County Executive. And Ramond, I don't know if the County Executive stole all your thunder, but if you have any left, if you could talk about Route 3.
He stole all of it, but I'm good with that. The only thing that I will point out is I think that what the question was asking is how it relates. So how the state's project relates to the county's project. So as the county executive pointed out, we have a capital improvement program here in which we have made these investments for state facilities like Maryland 2 and Maryland 3. And so with these projects, the state has a kind of a specificity or a section that they're updating, or sections of the whole corridor that they're updating with their TSMO, which stands for Transportation System Management and Operations. So that's a lot of that technological, not as much infrastructure improvement that the county executive was referring to, more like an operational improvement. Well, what we are saying and what the county executive is saying is, hey, we need to fix this. And so the county now with the capital improvement program by way of the PPI, we can get the needed infrastructure to go along with this TSMO, and it matches up with the purpose and the need that the state has to make these improvements along the corridor. So the corridor, it goes all the way up and through, but this is, from a primary perspective, this is kind of the first step in making the inroads to making these improvements going all the way up. So that's how it is associated together. We have to work with the state because it's the state's facility, but we're coming to the table with, means, and we're coming to the table with plans and interpretation that say, this is what we want to do. And it matches up with the purpose and need of the state. So we can work collectively to get these improvements made.
Great, thank you, Ramond. And now I'm going to hand it over to Chris Phipps to talk a little bit about that traffic on adequate public facilities. That's a mouthful ordinance that you're working on.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so just to follow up with the county executive, he had mentioned that there are two work groups going on right now, school APF and road or transportation APF, which is adequate public facilities. And what that means is when development comes along and they're proposing a development, they have to meet adequate public facility capacity by demonstrating that they are mitigating the impact of their traffic that they're adding to the roads. And that's done using what we call as a traffic impact study. So we're evaluating on this work group the methods that are used to complete these traffic impact studies. And what we're finding is that, essentially we haven't changed our method of traffic impact studies required by development over the last several decades. So we're luckily and fortunately, we started this process just as the Baltimore Metropolitan Council Transportation Group was doing something similar, where they were evaluating all the big counties and jurisdictions around Baltimore and evaluating what traffic impact study methods they were using. And we're now working with them and almost basically selecting the best of the best. So we're taking components of what they're finding in their analysis and applying them and stitching them together to develop a whole new traffic impact study methodology in Anne Arundel County. And what we'll be doing and where the group is going is doing what we call an expanded traffic impact study. So we'll be looking at other modes as well, not just motor vehicles, but pedestrian, transit, bicycle. So we'll be factoring all of that together into one package. And the other thing that's really exciting is historically our traffic impact studies have been limited to one intersection at a time. How much throughput can you put through an intersection? And as the county executive mentioned, if you're just looking at it as a binary system that you can pass traffic or not, that's not enough. The new modeling software that we're going to be looking at and are looking at will allow you to break that intersection down into turning lane movements. And you can get a rating for each turning lane movement, as well as how much traffic is passing through the intersection. So again, we're getting much smarter about how we understanding the current condition of our intersections and what steps are necessary to mitigate that down to the turning movement itself, not just the entire intersection. So these are the things we're working on now, and hopefully in the near future, we'll be wrapping up our recommendations, and then we'll be bringing them forward for hopeful implementation down the road.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I've got another hand up in the audience, the virtual audience here. So Amy Leahy, go ahead, you're on the air.
Hi, Matt. Yes, so I have some questions. I know that that the county executive talked about how we have all these empty seats in our schools in the county. So it sounds to me like what he's proposing is that we will redistrict all the schools to accommodate the schools that are overcrowded and move those children into schools that have unfilled seats. So that's one question that I have. The other question I have is actually more of a statement. The fact that the county executive is not looking at building any new home subdivisions, I've identified at least 4 bills put in within the last year that increase housing density. A lot of them are workforce housing bills that would where there's zoning changes that are being made that allow for high density, high-rise buildings to go into, say, for example, R5 areas. Now, to me, that speaks of definitely increasing the capacity on the roads and the schools. So that's kind of my question. And if Chris Phipps wants to go after that, that's fine. If, you know, Steve Ziegler wants to address it. So those are my concerns. And I think, you know, people should probably be aware that this is happening and will probably continue to happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And I'm going to actually invite the county executive to respond to that about the schools and also about the vision for workforce housing and affordable housing.
Yeah, the workforce housing density bonus density incentive was it was in place for a while. Nothing was built. It was removed. Some of it is back. I personally had some concerns about the higher density in R5, and because we have a lot of R5 communities that are you know, it would be inappropriate to put much higher density than that in those. And I don't believe that, you know, with all the other restrictions on that workforce housing, that's where the housing is going to go. And I would have actually been fine with taking it out of there. But I'm not opposed to density. I don't think density is a dirty word. I think that's how we preserve open space, and that's how we do smart growth and transit-oriented development. And there are people who, you know, who actually prefer to live in apartments. Believe it or not, some people want that kind of housing, and so I'm not necessarily opposed to density if it's the kind of quality mixed-use communities that we've been talking about for town centers. Now, as far as the and we absolutely have to figure out a way, in my view, to have housing at various income levels, because whether it's young people who are starting out in life, or older people, or people who work in our county and would otherwise be using the roads to come in and out to be able to get to the businesses they work at, and they're lower wage workers, it's not in our interest to not have housing for them. So we have to have, I think, housing at all income levels. As far as the schools go, the fact that we have 10,000 empty seats in our school district is just a fact. The solution, it's obviously fiscally irresponsible to build a lot of school buildings when you have an empty school, you know, down the road, just because you don't want to change the boundary. But there are different ways of doing that. I mean, one is that I don't know that this has been done, and this is a little bit of off the wall idea, but I know actually that we have some housing where the residents of that housing go to a different school district, because it was a deal that was made based on the planning for that. And I don't think that's out of the question. For instance, if a developer knows that that person's subdivision is going to be using a district that wouldn't normally be their district, it's new people moving in. They're not being asked to change for their kids. They're just moving into one area and then they're going to school in another. That's another way of doing it, so that kids aren't being moved. But it's always controversial. It's obviously not up to the county government. It's up to the school board to decide what the boundaries should be. But the fact that we have those 10,000 seats is something that I don't think we should ignore.
Thanks, County Executive, and thank you, Ms. Leahy, for the question. So actually, we have run out of time this evening. I want to invite the County Executive for a few last words, but before that, I want to say thank you, everybody. You all joined us out of your very busy weeks to be here tonight, and I know that you're going to stay engaged. And again, we encourage you to go to that Plan 2040 website that is posted in the chat. Go ahead and download the document, probably the smaller one, a little bit easier to read, and go ahead and comment before November 15th. So County Executive, you want to close the night for us?
Sure. I'll just say that it has been really gratifying to see the amount of community engagement in this process. It's been going on for a couple of years, and particularly the Plan 2040 at home, where people were able to get into the maps and make comments. We're in another comment period, And so I really encourage people to do that. It's unfortunate this happened during a pandemic, so it's hard to meet in person, but I think the virtual work has been good for most people. You can go to the libraries, and our libraries are open by appointment only. So you make an appointment, you go to your local library, and you can get a hard copy, or you can log in to look at the document and comment on it that way. Please continue to stay engaged. And this is clearly the most important thing that I'll be working on as county executive. It's the reason that I ran for this office. My own feeling was that growth and development had not been managed well in this county in the past, and I wanted to do something about it. So, and it really is interrelated with every kind of quality of life issue that our residents experience. So this is how we plan for our future for our people. Please comment and stay engaged. And thank you for all these incredible people who are working on this within county government. You're amazing public servants.
Thank you, County Executive. And thank you, Mr. Kai Ziegler, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Phipps, and Miss Rhodes. And thank you to everyone online. Have a great rest of your Thursday evening.